All right, you guys, we are going to finish up Raymie Nightingale today, and I hope you loved it as much as I do, and I hope you'll continue on with the series if you're interested in Louisiana's Way Home and Beverly Right Here. Both of those are follow-ups for this book, so it's the only series that Kate DiCamillo ever has done so far, so it's pretty fun to kind of keep up with those same characters in the next two books. All right, chapter 47. Louisiana wasn't breathing, and Beverly was crying, which was almost as terrifying as Louisiana not breathing. And the swan was still trying to stretch his head right off his neck. He was leaning forward and looking at them and hissing. Bunny was sniffing around Louisiana's head, snuffling her barrettes and letting out low moans. Louisiana was stretched out on the grass by the pond, which was really a sinkhole. The yellow lights stood around them, looking down at them, waiting. Raymie turned Louisiana over. She turned her head to the side. She beat on her back with her fists. Mr. Stephanopoulos had taught her how to save a drowning person, how to get the water out of someone's lungs, and she did everything he had taught her to do. She remembered it all. She remembered it in the right order. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" shouted Beverly. Bunny moaned. The swan hissed. The yellow lights shone on. "What are you doing?" asked Beverly, still crying. Raymie pounded on Louisiana's back. A flood of water and also a few pond weeds exited Louisiana's mouth in a great rush. Then there was more water and more water and more water and another weed. And then came Louisiana's squeaky, hopeful voice saying, "Oh my goodness." Raymie's soul was huge inside of her. She felt a tremendous love for Louisiana Elefante and for Beverly Topinski and for the hissing swan and the moaning dog and the dark pond and the yellow lights. Most of all, she felt love for the furry toad and furry-backed Mr. Stephanopoulos, who was gone, who had moved to North Carolina with Edgar the drowning dummy. Mr. Stephanopoulos, who had put his hand on her head and told her goodbye. Mr. Stephanopoulos, who had taught Raymie how to do exactly this, how to save Louisiana Elefante before he went away. "The hospital," said Beverly. They picked Louisiana up together and started walking. They had gotten good at carrying her. They went up the hill, and Bunny followed them. The swan stayed behind. Louisiana said, "I can't swim." "Yeah," said Beverly, "we know." Beverly, who was still crying. Chapter 48. There was a nurse standing outside the hospital doors. She was smoking a cigarette. Her left elbow was cupped in her right hand, and she was holding the cigarette and staring at the four of them as they came up the hill. "Oh, my Lord," said the nurse. She slowly lowered the cigarette. She had on a name tag that read, Marceline. "She drowned," said Beverly. "She didn't drown," said Raymie. "She almost drowned. She swallowed water." "I have swampy lungs," said Louisiana. "I can't swim." "Come here, baby," said Marceline. She dropped the cigarette and took Louisiana from them and carried her through the automatic doors. Beverly sat down on the curb. She wrapped her arms around Bunny and buried her face in his neck. "You go," she said. "I'm going to sit out here for a while." "Okay," said Raymie, and she walked through the doors, went up to the nurse at the front desk, and asked if she could use the phone to call her mother. This nurse had a name tag that said Ruthie. Raymie thought how nice name tags were. She wished that everyone in the world wore them. "Look at you," said Ruthie. "You are soaking wet." "I was in the pond," said Raymie. "It is 5 o'clock in the morning," said Ruthie. "What was you doing in a pond at 5 a.m.? "It's complicated," said Raymie. "It has to do with a cat named Archie who got taken to the Very Friendly Animal Center and—" "And what?" said Ruthie. Raymie tried to figure out how to explain it. She realized that she didn't even know where to begin. She was cold all of a sudden. She started to shiver. "Have you ever heard of the Little Miss Central Florida Tire Contest?" she asked. "The what?" said Ruthie. Raymie's teeth were chattering. Her knees were knocking together. It was so cold. She began again, and then suddenly she knew exactly what she needed to tell Ruthie. "My father ran away. He ran away with a dental hygienist named Leanne Dickerson, and isn't coming back." "That skunk," said Ruthie. She stood up and came out from behind the desk. She took off her sweater, which was a blue sweater like the one Martha at the Golden Glen wore. She draped the sweater over Raymie's shoulders. The blue sweater smelled like roses and something deeper and sweeter even than roses. It was so warm. Raymie started to cry. "Shh, shh," said Ruthie. "Now tell me your mama's name, phone number, and I'll call her." "Okay, yes. Good morning," said Ruthie, when Raymie's mother answered the phone. "Everything is just fine. I have your baby girl here at the hospital. There's nothing to worry about except that she is soaking wet because she has been swimming in a pond. Also, she told me about how her daddy ran off with a woman named Leanne." Ruthie listened. "Mm-hmm," she said after a minute. She listened some more. "Uh-huh," said Ruthie. "Some people just skunks. There ain't no other way to say it." Outside the glass doors, Raymie could see Beverly sitting on the curb. Her arm was around Bunny. There was lightness in the sky above their heads. The sun was going to come up. "You don't have to explain it to me," said Ruthie, still on the phone with Raymie's mother. "I understand all that. Yes, I do. But your baby girl is here, and she is just fine, and she is waiting for you." Chapter 49. Things happened fast then. Adults showed up. Raymie's mother arrived and pulled Raymie into her arms and held her close and rocked her back and forth and back and forth. Beverly's mother showed up and sat next to Beverly on the curb, the dog in between them. And after a long while, Louisiana's grandmother arrived too. She was wearing her fur coat, and she sat beside Louisiana's bed and held her hand and cried without making any noise at all. Raymie told the story of what had happened again and again, how the shopping cart had gone into the water, and how Louisiana couldn't swim, and how Raymie had pulled her out of the water and pounded her on the back, and how that was something she had learned from a man named Mr. Staphopoulos, who taught a class called Life Saving 101. A reporter from the Lister Press showed up. Raymie spelled Elefante for him. She spelled Staphopoulos. She told him that Clark had an E on the end of it. The reporter took Raymie's picture. And the whole time, Louisiana was asleep in a white hospital bed. She wasn't talking. She had a high fever. But she would be fine. Everyone kept saying that she would be fine. It was Ruthie who said, "This child needs to sleep. Everybody needs to stop asking her questions and let her go home and sleep." But Raymie didn't want to go home. She wanted to be where Louisiana was. So Ruthie brought a cot into Louisiana's room, and Raymie lay down on it. She fell asleep right away. And when she woke up, Louisiana was still sleeping, and Louisiana's grandmother was still wearing her fur coat. She was still holding Louisiana's hand, and she was asleep too. The hallway outside of the room was lit up, shining with afternoon light, just like the common room at the Golden Glen. Raymie got up and stood in the doorway of the room and looked at the bright and shining path. A cat was walking toward her. Raymie stood and stared. The cat came closer and closer. Raymie recognized him from her dream. She recognized him from Mrs. Borkowski's suitcase. It was Archie. The cat brushed past her. He came into the room and leaped up on Louisiana's bed and curled himself into a tight ball. Raymie went and lay down on her cot. She fell asleep again. When she woke up, it was dusk, and Archie was still curled up at Louisiana's feet. He was purring so loudly that the hospital bed was shaking. Archie, king of the cats. He had returned. Louisiana's fever broke that night. She sat up in bed and said, "Oh my goodness, I'm hungry." Her voice was scratchy, and then she looked down at her feet and saw the cat. "Archie," she said, as if she wasn't surprised at all. She bent forward and pulled him into her arms. She looked around the room. She said, "And there's Granny." She looked at her grandmother, who was sleeping in the chair beside the bed, and then Louisiana looked at Raymie and said, "Raymie Nightingale, there you are, too." "Here I am," said Raymie. "Where's Beverly?" "She's at home, taking care of Bunny." "Bunny," said Louisiana in a voice of wonder. "We saved Bunny. Remember how we saved him?" Ruthie came into the room and said, "How did that cat get in here?" "He found me," said Louisiana. "I lost him. He lost me. We went looking for him, and he found me." Raymie closed her eyes and saw Mrs. Borkowski opening the suitcase and pulling Archie out of it. "It's kind of a miracle," she said. "Ain't no miracle," said Ruthie. "It's just a cat. That's how they do." Chapter 50. The other thing that happened in the hospital was that the phone rang at the nurse's station, and it was for Raymie. Ruthie came into the room and said, "Somebody on the phone for you, Raymie Clark." Raymie went out into the hallway to the phone. She still had on Ruthie's sweater. It came down to her knees. "Hello?" said Raymie. Ruthie was standing right beside Raymie. She put out her hand on Raymie's shoulder. "Raymie?" said the voice on the other end. "Dad?" said Raymie. "I saw your picture. It was in the paper, and I wanted to check on you and make sure—" Raymie couldn't think of what to say. She stood and held the phone up to her ear. There was nothing but a great silence. It was like listening for the ocean in a seashell and not ever hearing it. It was like that. After a while, Ruthie took the phone out of Raymie's hand and spoke into it. She said, "This child is tired. She has saved somebody from drowning. Do you understand what I'm saying? She saved somebody's life." And then Ruthie hung up the phone. "He is a skunk," she said to Raymie, "and that's all there is to it." She put her hands on Raymie's shoulders. She guided her back to Louisiana's room. Raymie got on her cot and fell back asleep. When she woke up, she wondered if she had dreamed the whole thing. Mostly what she remembered was holding the phone for that long silence, the silence of her father not saying anything, and her not saying anything back. And then, too, she remembered Ruthie's hands on her shoulders, guiding her back to the room where Louisiana was alive and breathing, and a cat was curled up at her feet, sleeping. Chapter 51. Last chapter. Louisiana competed in the Little Miss Central Florida Tire Contest. She wore her lucky bunny barrettes and a blue dress spangled with silver sequins. She did not twirl a baton. She sang, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. The contest was in the Finch Auditorium. Louisiana's grandmother was there, and Beverly was there, and Beverly's mother, and Raymie's mother, and Raymie. Ida Nee was there, but she did not look happy. Ruthie came from the hospital, and Mrs. Sylvester came from Jim Clark Family Insurance. They all sat together. Raymie's father was not there. Raymie was not surprised. She was only happy when Louisiana won the contest and was crowned Little Miss Central Florida Tire. Later, after Louisiana was presented with a check for $1,975 and also with a sash that said Little Miss Central Florida Tire 1975, Beverly Topinski and Raymie Clark and Louisiana Elefante went to the top of the Belknap Tower, even though Louisiana was afraid of heights. "I'm afraid of heights," said Louisiana, who was still wearing her crown and her sash. She kept her eyes closed and lay on the floor of the observation deck. But Raymie and Beverly stood at the railing and looked out. "See?" said Beverly to Raymie. "Yes," said Raymie. "Tell me what you're seeing," said Louisiana, who was face down on the floor and refused to stand up. "Everything," said Raymie. "Describe it," said Louisiana. Raymie said, "I can see Swip Pond and the swans and Lake Clara and the hospital. I can see the Golden Glen and Jim Clark Family Insurance. I can see Ida Nee's house and the Tag and Bag Grocery. I can see Building 10. "What else?" said Louisiana. "I can see Ida Nee's moose head, and I can see the candy corn jar on Mrs. Sylvester's desk. I can see the ghost of Clara Wingtip. I can see the yellow bird from the Golden Glen." "Is he flying?" said Louisiana. "Yes," said Raymie. "What else?" said Louisiana. "I can see Ida Nee twirling her baton. I can see Ruthie. She's waving at us. And there's Archie and Bunny." "Don't call him Bunny," said Beverly, who had renamed the dog Buddy. After a while, Beverly went and picked Louisiana up and brought her to the railing. "Open your eyes," said Beverly, "and look for yourself." Louisiana opened her eyes. "Oh, my goodness," she said. "We're up so high." "Don't worry," said Beverly. "I'm holding on to you." Raymie took hold of Louisiana's hand. She said, "I've got you, too." The three of them stood like that for a long time, looking out at the world. Very good book. It's about a friendship between those three girls, and I think it's definitely realistic fiction. We can relate to being one of them. Some of the questions here are, what three words would you use to describe Raymie or Louisiana, Beverly? Maybe think about some of those words that would describe each one. Are there heroes in this story, and who do you think they are? A question that echoes throughout the story is, what is life all about? And does the story give us any answers for that? Can you relate to the girls' thoughts and fears? Do you think the kids in this story see life and death differently than the adults do? And who do you think is the most hopeful character in the story? And who else is hopeful? So those are things to think about. That's Raymie Nightingale. Let me move for a second. I've been rereading for myself Winn-Dixie. I have this one to read this summer, and it's been in my classroom all year, and I was going to read it to us next. Flora and Ulysses. It's also by Kate DiCamillo, but the ones in the series, this is the next one. Louisiana's Way Home, and I see a bunny barrette. This is what the illustrator has made Louisiana look like. And we have then one more after that, and it's Beverly right here. And so this is what the illustrator has made Beverly look like. All right, so that's something to consider. Consider just doing a whole author study of Kate DiCamillo as you go through the summer maybe. I hope you won't just not read. We've already had a little bit of what I'm going to call the corona slump, not being able to be at school, have Mrs. Johnson after you all the time to review and work hard and remember the things you need to remember. So be sure to read this summer. I won't be reading another long book before school's out, but I will read some more stories. Starting tomorrow, I'll read stories that I can finish in one day. So stay tuned. Keep commenting or marking like that, and I'll know that you're still reading and listening to me.